key taps. ... A metallic rhythm slicing through the pre-dawn stillness of a Damascus morning. The sound is dry, electric, alien in the quiet apartment. It is a 5:43. The air, thick with the smell of yesterday's coffee, and the faint, sharp scent of ozone from the transmitter's vacuum tubes, feels heavy, charged. The man's fingers are unnaturally steady on the telegraph key. To the world, he is Kamel Amin Thabet, a fabulously wealthy Syrian expatriate, an importer of fine European furniture, a man whose patriotism is as loud as his generosity. But the name, the wealth, the entire identity, is a meticulously constructed shell. The man is Eliyahu Ben Shaul Cohen, Katsa 566, designated Agent 88 of the Israeli Mossad. The message he sends is not words, but blocks of 5-digit numeric code, a language of ghosts, meaningless to anyone on Earth without the corresponding one-time pad. This pad is a tiny, fragile booklet of random keys, its twin resting in a secure vault in Tel Aviv. After this single use, this page will be turned to ash. The message itself is a blueprint for destruction. It contains the exact specifications of the Syrian 3rd Armored Division's new deployment along the Golan Heights. Concrete thickness of the command bunkers, down to the centimeter. Firing angles of the newly installed 120mm D-30 howitzers. The precise grid coordinates of hidden anti-tank ditches. He is transmitting on a frequency chosen for its obscurity, tucked between a Bulgarian diplomatic channel and a Soviet weather broadcast. But he is violating the most sacred rule of transmission protocol. His handler's last message, micro-dotted onto the period of a shipping invoice, was explicit. Transmit only between 02 hours and 04 hours. Bursts under 30 seconds. Acknowledge. It is almost hours, and this transmission is already pushing 3 minutes. The intelligence is too vital. President Amin al-Hafiz himself, his dear friend, had taken him on a personal tour of the fortifications just days before, clapping him on the back, boasting of their invincibility against the Zionist entity. Cohen had smiled, nodded, his mind a camera, every detail recorded, indexed, and stored. Now, that mental film is being converted into dots and dashes. The transmission is an eternity. A single bead of sweat breaks free from his hairline, tracing a cold path down his temple. He doesn't dare wipe it. Focus is survival. The rhythm is everything. ... The needle on the transmitter's power meter, a delicate West German instrument, flickers erratically. A power fluctuation in the city grid. His blood runs cold. A surge could blow a tube, silencing him. A dip could weaken the signal, rendering it unintelligible. Outside, the city begins to stir. A truck backfires on the boulevard below, and for a split second, his entire body locks. 1,000 hours of training screaming danger. He forces the breath from his lungs, regains control. He continues the sequence. The final block of numbers is sent. The sign-off code. Transmission complete. His hand moves to the power switch. And then he hears it. Not a backfire, a new sound. The organized, deliberate thud of military boots on the central staircase of the building. Not one man. Not two. A team. They move with a quiet efficiency that screams professionalism. He has, at most, 5 seconds. The transmitter, a custom-built unit disguised inside a heavy wooden credenza, is immovable. But the one-time pad and the day's decoded message, those are the crown jewels. They are absolute proof. His eyes, frantic but disciplined, scan the room. Under the floorboard? Too slow, they'll tear the place apart. In the toilet cistern? The first place they'll look. The boots are on his landing now. A fist, hard as rock, hammers against his door. Mukhabarat, Fatah el-Bab, open the door. The State Security Service, the boogeymen of Damascus. There is no escape. The choice is not between freedom and capture. It is between what they find and what they don't. He snatches the flimsy paper pad and the message notes, shoves the entire wad into his mouth, and begins to chew. The bitter, chemical taste of ink and cheap paper flooding his senses as the steel-reinforced door splinters inward off its hinges. This single moment, the violent destruction of a door in a luxury Damascus apartment on the morning of January 24th, 1965, was not an end. It was the detonation point of a legend, the final bloody stop on one of the most audacious, high-stakes, and successful intelligence operations in modern history. To comprehend how Mossad agent Eli Cohen came to be chewing state secrets while facing down the barrels of Syrian rifles, one step from the gallows and 2 steps from the Syrian presidency, we must spool back the tape. We must examine the cold, brutal calculus of geopolitical survival. The story begins not with a man, but with a map. And on that map, a single blue line representing a river. The Jordan River. In the early 1960s, Israel was a nation under siege, a sliver of land surrounded by armies sworn to its annihilation. Its most profound vulnerability was not military, but elemental: water. The national water carrier, a colossal network of pipes, canals, and pumps designed to carry water from the Sea of Galilee in the north to the parched Negev desert in the south, was the nation's artery. And Syria, from its dominant perch on the Golan Heights, was methodically preparing to sever it. The Arab League's headwater diversion plan was an act of strategic warfare disguised as civil engineering. By constructing a massive canal, they would divert the Hasbani and Banayas rivers, the 2 primary sources that form the Jordan, eastward into the desert, starving Israel of an estimated 35% of its water supply. It was a slow-motion execution. Israeli intelligence, Amman and Mossad, watched the project with growing alarm. Reconnaissance photos showed the Syrian bulldozers carving their path through the rock. The Israeli Air Force flew punitive strikes, bombing the construction equipment. But these were temporary solutions, tactical bandages on a strategic wound. They were fighting an enemy they could see but not understand. They needed answers. What was the true political will in Damascus driving the project? Was it a bluff or a genuine casus belli? What was the exact construction timeline? Where were the secondary pumping stations located? More urgently, they needed a complete schematic of the Syrian military's offensive and defensive posture on the Golan. Where was every tank, every artillery piece, every command bunker, every minefield? Previous attempts to insert spies, or katsas, into Syria had ended in unmitigated disaster. In 1957, an agent was caught and executed. In 1961, another network was rolled up, its members tortured into confession. The Syrian Mukhabarat, the General Security Directorate, was a formidable machine of internal security. Its senior ranks filled with former Nazi intelligence officers like Alois Brunner, who had found comfortable sanctuary and employment in Damascus. They had forged Syria into a fortress of paranoia and suspicion. Israel didn't just need another spy to sneak across the border. They needed a messiah of espionage. Someone who could walk through the front door of the Syrian High Command, be welcomed as a brother, and sit at their table while they plotted Israel's demise. The directive came from the top, from Mossad Director Mir Amit. Amit was a new breed of intelligence chief, a pragmatist who had replaced the legendary but increasingly erratic Isser Harel. Amit, a former general, believed in a holistic approach, but his bedrock was human intelligence. He had a problem that spy satellites and radio intercepts could not solve. He needed a man on the inside. The search began. It was a hunt for a unicorn. The candidate profile was a paradox. He had to possess a flawless, native Syrian Arabic accent and an innate understanding of the culture's complex web of honor, family, and patronage. He needed a photographic memory, the ability to absorb blueprints, technical manuals, and conversations without a single note. He required the courage of a soldier, but also the nuanced cunning of a politician. Above all, he needed a specific kind of ego. Not arrogance, but an unshakable, deep-seated belief in his ability to inhabit a new identity so completely that it would suffocate his old self. The search committee waded through hundreds of files. They found their man not in the field, but in a dusty office in Tel Aviv. He was a 36-year-old bookkeeper for a retail chain. His name was Eliyahu Ben Shal Cohen. On paper, he was deeply unimpressive. Born in Alexandria, Egypt, to a devout Syrian Jewish family from Aleppo. He had been a passionate Zionist in his youth, part of an Israeli intelligence network in Egypt that helped smuggle Jews out of the country after the 1948 war. He was briefly involved in the disastrous Operation Susanna, a botched 1954 Israeli false flag operation to bomb American and British targets in Egypt to sour their relations with Gamal Abdel Nasser. The network was caught, its members executed or imprisoned. Cohen, through sheer luck, was not implicated but was interrogated and placed under surveillance. This failure, known in Israel as the Lavon Affair, left him with a deep sense of unfinished business. He had immigrated to Israel, but his life was one of quiet disappointment. He had applied to Mossad once before, in the late 1950s, but the psychological assessors had rejected him. Their report cited his overdeveloped ego, his tendency to exhibitionism, and a lack of stability. He was, they concluded, a security risk. But where the old guard saw flaws, Mayor Amit saw the raw material. He saw a man bored by civilian life, a man who felt his talents were being wasted. He saw an actor who was desperate for a grand stage. Cohen's ego was the very engine of self-confidence needed to pull off an impossible role. Cohen was approached again. He underwent a battery of new, intensive tests designed to measure his breaking point. He was subjected to mock interrogations, sleep deprivation, and psychological manipulation. He never cracked. This time, he was accepted. The transformation began. The bookkeeper, Eli Cohen, was systematically erased. In his place, Mossad's Legend Department, the masters of identity creation, built a new man from scratch, Kemal Amin Thabet. The cover story was a novel of breathtaking detail. Kemal was a Syrian Muslim, born in Beirut to parents from Aleppo. His family had emigrated to Alexandria, where his father had built a successful textile business. After his parents' death, Kemal, along with his siblings, moved to Buenos Aires, Argentina, to build their own fortune. In Argentina, Kemal became a titan of the import-export world, a charismatic, bon vivant bachelor who drove expensive cars and hosted legendary parties. He was also a fervent Syrian nationalist, a passionate supporter of the new Ba'ath Party, who now, after making his fortune, yearned to return to his homeland to invest his wealth and skills in building a new, powerful Syria. Every detail was backstopped. A shell company, Thabet and Comer's Transoceanic Trading, was registered in Buenos Aires. Bank accounts were opened and filled with substantial funds. Shipping manifests were created. A family history was fabricated, complete with staged photographs of his parents and siblings, played by Mossad agents, and letters written in aged ink on period-appropriate paper. For over a year, Eli Cohen lived and breathed as Kamel Amin Thabet in Buenos Aires. It was not a role. It was a complete psychological transference. He immersed himself in the city's large and influential Arab expatriate community. His apartment, lavishly furnished and always stocked with the best scotch, became the unofficial salon for Arab diplomats, military attachés, and businessmen. He spoke with fiery passion about Arab unity, about the glory of the Ba'athist revolution, and about the existential necessity of destroying Israel. His wealth bought him access. His seemingly genuine patriotism bought him trust. His charisma bought him friends. One of his most important friends was Sheikh Majid al-Ard, the influential editor of an Arabic-language newspaper in Argentina. Another was a hulking, ambitious man named General Amin al-Hafiz, the Syrian military attaché. Hafiz was a key figure in the Ba'ath Party's military committee, a man destined for power. Thabet, the wealthy patriot, cultivated him relentlessly. He loaned Hafiz money for a down payment on a new home. He threw extravagant parties in his honor. He listened for hours as Hafiz drunkenly laid out his political ambitions and his hatred for the old guard in Damascus. By late 1961, the legend was solid gold. Kamel Amin Thabet was a known quantity, a man vouched for by the highest echelons of Syrian society in exile. The time had come for the ghost to enter the fortress. Cohen, now fully and irrevocably Kamel Amin Thabet, traveled from Argentina to Damascus, taking a circuitous route through Zurich and Beirut to add another layer of legitimacy to his cover. He arrived not as a shadow, but in a blaze of glory, a celebrated patriot returning home. His entry was graced by a sheaf of letters of introduction from his powerful friends, chief among them General al-Hafiz. He rented a large, opulent apartment in the heavily secured Abu Rumaneh district of Damascus. The location was a work of operational genius. It was directly across the street from the Syrian Army's General Staff headquarters and a block away from the presidential palace. From his balcony, using a powerful pair of binoculars while pretending to read a newspaper, he could watch the daily comings and goings of Syria's entire military leadership. He established his import-export business, a legitimate enterprise that served as the perfect cover. The large crates of European furniture he imported were his lifeline. Hidden in false bottoms, hollowed-out table legs, and specially constructed compartments were the tools of his trade. A state-of-the-art Haganuk ST-60 radio transmitter capable of both Morse and voice transmission, fresh one-time pads, a Minox B subminiature camera, chemicals for developing microfilm, and bundles of untraceable US dollars. He replicated the lifestyle he had perfected in Buenos Aires. His apartment became the most exclusive, high-stakes nightclub in Damascus. Every evening, it was thronged with high-ranking military officers, government ministers, Ba'ath Party officials, and powerful businessmen. They came for the vintage French wine, the Cuban cigars, the beautiful women he procured from Beirut, and the intoxicating feeling of being in the presence of a man who was both fabulously wealthy and politically pure. In this decadent atmosphere, lubricated by alcohol and ego, secrets became currency. A drunken Air Force colonel would complain about the maintenance problems on the new MiG-21s. A Ministry of Defense procurement officer would boast about a secret deal for Czech anti-tank weapons. A cousin of a government minister would whisper about an impending purge within the party. Cohen was the perfect host, a smiling, avuncular figure who listened more than he talked, absorbing every word, every nuance, filing it away in his eidetic memory. His intelligence reports, sent in short, coded bursts in the dead of night, began to flow to Tel Aviv. At first, the intelligence was tactical. The schedule of troop rotations on the border, the names and psychological profiles of newly promoted brigade commanders, the abysmal state of morale in the infantry divisions. The transmitter was his most crucial tool and his greatest liability. It was concealed within a large writing desk, its components distributed throughout the furniture structure. The telegraph key disguised as a decorative brass fitting. To any observer, he was simply a businessman catching up on correspondence. But the Syrian Mukhabarat, with its new Soviet-supplied technical support, was constantly sweeping the city with sophisticated radio direction finding, RDF, vehicles, hunting for the telltale signature of an illicit transmission. To evade them, Cohen used a burst transmission technique. He would pre-record his Morse code message onto a magnetic tape at a slow, deliberate speed. Then, he would connect the tape player to the transmitter and run it at high speed, compressing a 10-minute message into a silent, data-dense burst of less than 30 seconds. It was a fleeting electronic whisper, incredibly difficult for the RDF teams to get a fix on. But the risk was cumulative. Every tap of the key, every 30-second burst, was another spin of the wheel in a game of Russian roulette. Then, on March 8, 1963, a violent coup d'etat ripped through Damascus. The Ba'ath Party seized absolute power. The city was locked down. The government was purged. For any other intelligence asset, this would have been a catastrophic event. Cohen's entire network of contacts, so carefully cultivated, was now either in prison, in exile, or dead. His operation should have been over. But for Eli Cohen, it was a miracle. The new president of Syria, the absolute ruler of the country, was none other than his old friend and confidant from Buenos Aires, General Amin al-Hafiz. Hafiz, now consolidating his power, remembered the wealthy, fiercely loyal patriot Kamil Amin Thabet. He saw him as one of the few people who had believed in him before his ascent. More importantly, Thabet was a civilian, a man seemingly outside the web of military cliques and rivalries that threatened Hafiz's rule. He summoned Cohen to the presidential palace. The two men embraced. Cohen's access was no longer second-hand, gleaned from drunken conversations. It was direct and absolute. He became a regular at the palace, one of the few people who could see the president without an appointment. He played chess with the Minister of Defense. He went on hunting trips with the Chief of Staff. Hafiz trusted him so completely that he offered him the position of Deputy Minister of Defense. Cohen, under strict orders from his Mossad handlers who were watching this unprecedented success with a mixture of awe and terror, politely refused. An official position would mean a deep background check, a level of scrutiny that even his flawless cover might not survive. It was far better to be the trusted friend, the eminence grise, the man who had the president's ear without having his name on an official ledger. This quantum leap in access transformed his intelligence from valuable to priceless. He provided Mossad with the entire Syrian military order of battle, including the secret locations of their reserve brigades. He sent verbatim transcripts of Syrian cabinet meetings. He exposed the internal power struggles within the Ba'ath Party, allowing Israeli intelligence to predict Syrian political moves with uncanny accuracy. His single greatest intelligence coup, however, was the Golan Heights. The Syrian fortifications were a chain of 3 interlocking defensive lines, a labyrinth of concrete bunkers, artillery nests, tank traps, and minefields. Israeli military intelligence viewed a frontal assault as a virtual impossibility. President al-Hafiz, swelling with pride, personally took his dear friend Camel on multiple tours of the Golan's most secret and sensitive installations. Cohen, the furniture importer, stood inside the command bunkers of the general staff. He walked the trench lines. He observed the exact placement of their Soviet-made artillery. During one such visit, he executed a stroke of genius, born of pure audacity. He remarked to the Syrian commanders that the exposed concrete bunkers, baking under the relentless sun, must be hellish for the soldiers inside. He suggested, as a gesture of humanitarian concern and tactical cunning, that they plant fast-growing eucalyptus trees around each fortification. The trees, he argued, would provide much-needed shade for the troops and excellent natural camouflage from Israeli aerial reconnaissance. The Syrian commanders, impressed by this wealthy civilian's clever thinking, agreed enthusiastically. The trees were planted. What they failed to realize was that they had just allowed an Israeli spy to personally mark every single one of their secret positions with a distinctive, easily identifiable marker. For the Israeli artillery observers on the other side of the border, the Golan Heights was no longer an opaque fortress. It was a perfectly pre-sighted firing range. But with each new secret he uncovered, Cohen was tightening the noose around his own neck. His handlers in Tel Aviv were growing frantic. The sheer quality and quantity of his intelligence meant he was operating at an unsustainable level of risk. They sent him messages urging him to reduce transmissions, to lie low, to consider an exit strategy. Cohen, however, was at the apex of his life's ambition. He felt untouchable. He was advising the Syrian president, shaping policy, and single-handedly providing his country with the intelligence to guarantee its survival in the next war. He dismissed the warnings. A fatal sense of invincibility, the very ego that Mossad had once feared, was now in control. He began transmitting more often, sending longer, more detailed reports. He believed he was too important, too essential to fail. Meanwhile, the hunter was closing in. Colonel Ahmed Su'idani, the cold, methodical chief of Syrian counterintelligence, was a man obsessed. He knew, with absolute certainty, that there was a high-level mole in Damascus. The Israelis' uncanny ability to preempt Syrian military moves was proof. This was not the work of a low-level border informant. This was a leak from the very heart of the regime. He made finding this phantom his life's work. With new, highly sensitive Soviet RDF equipment and a team of KGB technical advisors, he escalated the hunt. He began imposing periods of total radio silence over Damascus, ordering all official transmitters, military, diplomatic, and commercial, to shut down for hours at a time. His theory was simple. In a silent forest, even a whisper sounds like a scream. Any transmission during these periods would instantly betray itself. In early January 1965, a seemingly unrelated event gave Su'idani the break he needed. The Indian embassy, located just down the street from Cohen's apartment, lodged an official complaint with the Syrian Foreign Ministry. Their diplomatic radio communications were being consistently disrupted by powerful interference from an unknown source. The complaint was passed to Su'idani. Cross-referencing the Indians' logs with his own data, he narrowed the search area from the entire city to a single, wealthy district, Abu Rumane, the home of diplomats, generals, and Camel Amin Thabet. On the morning of January 24th, Su'idani laid his trap. He ordered another citywide radio silence, but this time he deployed his 7 new RDF vans in a tight, overlapping net around Abu Rumaneh. In his apartment, Eli Cohen had just learned of a secret Syrian plan, codenamed Operation al-Nasr, for a massive armored thrust into northern Israel. The intelligence was time-sensitive in the extreme. Protocol, training, and survival instinct screamed at him to wait until the designated 0200 transmission window. But his confidence, now bordering on hubris, overruled them. He felt the information was too critical to delay. He made the decision that sealed his fate. He switched on his transmitter during the strictly enforced radio silence. The moment the first dot of his Morse code signal pierced the airwaves, alarms lit up in Suidani's command van. The signal was powerful, isolated, and nakedly exposed. An operator in Van 1 shouted a bearing. Azimuth 270, signal strength 9. Seconds later, another operator from Van 3, a kilometer away, called out a different bearing. Azimuth 185, strength 8. On the map table in Suidani's van, 2 pencils drew 2 lines. They intersected over a single building. The modern, elegant apartment block directly opposite the Syrian Army General Staff headquarters. Suidani had his man. 1809. Damascus time. The triangulation is cross-verified by a 3rd and 4th van. The signal source is isolated to the top floor, north-facing apartment. Colonel Suidani smiles. The hunt is over. 1812. He dispatches 3 8-man teams from his elite Mukhabarat commando unit. Their orders are explicit, absolute silence. No sirens. Approach on foot. Secure all exits, including the roof. No one enters or leaves the building. 1817. The teams are in position. A silent cordon is established. Snipers on the rooftops of adjacent buildings train their infrared scopes on the windows of the target apartment. 1820. Cohen finishes his transmission. He powers down the equipment. A profound, inexplicable sense of unease washes over him. The air in the room feels different, static and heavy. The ambient sounds of the city seem to have faded away. 1822. Suidani, listening on a secure radio from his command van, gives the single-word command, Imshi. Go. The breach team, clad in black, moves up the building's main stairwell, their movements fluid and silent. 1823. Cohen is securing the false panel of his desk when he hears it, a faint, metallic scrape at his front door's lock. It is not a knock. It is not an announcement. It is the sound of a professional entry. In that instant, he knows. This is not a random security check. They know who he is, what he is, and where he is. 1824. He ignores the door. His training takes over. Destroy evidence. He lunges for the one-time pad and the day's plaintext message notes. As his fingers close around the thin paper, the apartment door explodes inward, torn from its frame by a battering ram. The room is instantly filled with soldiers, their Kalashnikovs a forest of steel leveled at his heart. At the head of the assault team, a pistol in his hand, stands the triumphant figure of Colonel Ahmed Suidani. There is no firefight. There is no dramatic last stand. Eli Cohen stands up slowly, raising his empty hands. His face is a placid mask. The grand performance of Kamal Amin Thabet is over. The capture of the Damascus spy was a seismic event. For Syria, it was a moment of immense national pride and vindication. For President al-Hafiz, it was a source of profound, personal humiliation. The man he had called his friend, the man he had trusted with state secrets, was a Zionist agent of the highest caliber. The betrayal was absolute. Cohen was transported to the Mukhabarat's al-Mazah prison, a place from which few emerged sane. For the next 4 months, he was subjected to relentless, systematic torture. They used electricity, beatings, sleep deprivation, and psychological torment. They wanted everything: the names of his contacts, the locations of other Mossad networks, the intricacies of their communication methods. By all available accounts, he broke on his own identity, but on nothing else. He admitted he was Eli Cohen, an Israeli officer. But he revealed no operational information that could compromise other agents or ongoing missions. He protected his network to the very end. His trial was a televised spectacle, a show trial designed to demonstrate the invincibility of the Syrian state. Cohen, physically broken but unbowed, was paraded before the cameras and a military tribunal. The guilty verdict was a foregone conclusion. The sentence was death. Behind the scenes, Israel launched a desperate, multi-pronged campaign to save him. The government reached out to world leaders: France's Charles de Gaulle, the Belgian foreign minister, the Canadian prime minister, to apply diplomatic pressure on Damascus. Pope Paul VI made a personal appeal for clemency. Israel offered to trade a dozen captured Syrian spies and 2 captured Syrian MiG jets for Cohen's life. They offered Syria millions of dollars in medical supplies and agricultural equipment. The Syrian regime, basking in the glory of their counterintelligence coup, publicly and scornfully rejected every single offer. In the pre-dawn hours of May 18, 1965, Eli Cohen was led from his cell. He was permitted to write a final, heavily censored letter to his wife, Nadia, and their children. He was then dressed in a white robe, and a large placard was hung around his neck, detailing his crimes against the Syrian Arab Republic. He was driven to Marjah Square, Martyrs Square, in the center of Damascus. A vast, jeering crowd had been assembled to witness the event. A construction crane had been moved into the center of the square to serve as a gallows. At 3:30, under the glare of television lights, Eli Cohen was publicly hanged. His body was left to hang in the square until sunrise, a gruesome warning to the world and a symbol of Syrian triumph. The immediate fallout was a devastating blow to Mossad's morale and a strategic catastrophe. They had lost their single most valuable intelligence asset. But the true, world-altering impact of Cohen's work, the final, thunderous echo of his mission, was yet to be heard. His death was not the end of his story. It was the prelude to his ultimate legacy. The final, critical revelation that recontextualizes his entire operation is this: the full value of his intelligence was only realized after he was dead. In June 1967, 2 years after his execution, the Six-Day War erupted. The Israeli Air Force, armed with the precise locations of Syrian air bases, radar domes, and command centers provided by Cohen, obliterated the Syrian Air Force on the ground in the first few hours of the conflict. Then, the Israeli army turned its attention to the Golan Heights, the supposedly impregnable fortress that had threatened Israel for 2 decades. Israeli commanders went into battle not with maps, but with a holy text: the compiled intelligence reports of Eli Cohen. They knew the exact layout of all 3 defensive lines. They knew the firing arcs of every artillery battery. They knew the dead zones in the machine gun nests' fields of fire. And most crucially, they used the eucalyptus trees that Cohen had so brilliantly convinced the Syrians to plant as their primary targeting markers. Israeli artillery, instead of firing blindly, was able to systematically and precisely dismantle each Syrian bunker one by one. The impregnable Golan Heights which international military analysts predicted would cost Israel thousands of lives and weeks of fighting, fell to the Israeli Defense Forces in less than 36 hours. The intelligence gathered by one man, working alone for 3 years, directly resulted in one of the most stunning and decisive military victories of the 20th century. Eli Cohen's mission, which ended with his body swaying from a crane in Damascus, saved thousands of Israeli lives and permanently redrew the strategic map of the Middle East. His body was never returned. Despite decades of impassioned pleas from his family and back-channel diplomatic efforts, the Syrian government has refused to reveal the location of his grave. In death, he remains a prisoner of the state he so masterfully deceived. He is a ghost in their machine, a martyr whose final resting place is itself a state secret, a final testament to the man who became his enemy so completely that he brought that enemy to his knees from beyond the grave. His final transmission was not a string of numbers in January 1965. His true final message was delivered in June 1967 by the roar of Israeli tanks cresting the ridge of the Golan Heights, guided to victory by the memory of a spy who was already gone.